Deloads are one of those things. Like the whole premise of a deload is the idea that you're carrying stress over from not just session to session, which then dissipates, but actually microcycle to microcycle, which then continues to mount and gets to the point where it's actually impacting your ability to induce progressive overload, right? So if you think about it, if you only train 2 or 3 days per week, you've got 4 or 5 days off per week. You have more days not training than you have training. And unless you're doing just a massive amount of very hard work in those 2 to 3 sessions, you're probably not going to need a deload. You're doing a sufficient amount to progress, and that will work for you all the way through probably your intermediate phase in most cases. And that's most people. But if you do have like some pretty serious goals, recreational or competitive, you're going to get to the point where you might benefit, not necessarily require, like I said, benefit from a program that pushes you to the point where you actually have lingering fatigue from going to your Monday to Tuesday and your Thursday and Saturday sessions that doesn't all completely resolve on your Sunday day off before you start again on Monday. And then 3 weeks later, you're finding the same workout plus a little bit of load is disproportionately harder on Monday than it was 2 weeks ago and last week. And eventually you might need a deload. So the way you assess that is simply, am I carrying fatigue? Do I get to a point where my ability to progress on certain lifts is slowed or inconsistent, right? You start to see more variability in your performance and those other things I mentioned. And that's the whole reason you do a deload. So the idea is that if we are pushing the envelope and we're inducing sufficient stress that carries over microcycle to microcycle, then we might need deloads to separate mesocycles, which are multiple weeks of training blocked together. And ideally, they shouldn't need to happen so frequently that they're every other week or even every third week, but something that comes as a adaptive strategy that you go through this checklist and you implement them, and it happens every 6 to 12 weeks is typically a good frequency of a deload on average. But I think sometimes people think they need deloads because they're a thing, but a lot of people are using a program that is just not pushing the envelope to where they're carrying fatigue over week to week to week to week, and they just don't need it. And a quote unquote deload on a novice program might just be like, drop the load back a little bit. You're just trying to progress too fast. You should have gone from 135 to 140 instead of 135 to 145. You don't really need to cut your volume in half for a week because you're only training 3 days per week, as an example.
Yeah, that's such a key skill to learn because I think if generally speaking, like for a beginner, when they kind of hit like a hurdle, the first thought is, okay, I gotta do a different program now. But in fact, it's like, okay, maybe take a deload, and then you're gonna make progress again for a few more weeks, and you want to juice as much out of the program as possible before you have to hop on a different protocol.
Yep, that's very well said. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. You want to milk your newbie gains for what they're worth, and nothing wrong with trying different approaches, especially if you plateaued. But I think a lot of people try different approaches when they're not actually plateaued yet.